Hi students, welcome to lesson number 14 on descriptive research design, and here we are also going to understand what are its advantages as well as disadvantages. A brief introduction. Descriptive statistics plays an important role in educational research, and thus it is essential to understand its nature, its function of the research. Descriptive studies helps in drawing inferences about cause and effect. The research can be quantitative or qualitative, or sometimes utilizes the elements of both quantitative or qualitative research methodologies within the same study. The term descriptive research refers to the type of research that asks questions, design and data analysis that will be applied to a given topic. Descriptive statistics tells us what is, while inferential statistics tells to determine cause and effect. The three main purposes of research are to describe, explain and validate the findings. Description emerges following creative exploration and serves to organize the findings in order to fit them with the explanations and then test or validate those explanations. Now, what are the objectives of the lesson? The students here will be able to understand or to define the descriptive research design. They will explain the different steps involved while taking descriptive studies, and also they will be able to explain various types of descriptive studies. Now, what is the design for descriptive studies? The major goal of a descriptive research is to describe the events, phenomena and situations. The descriptive study, as the name suggests, describes as accurately as possible the characteristics of a group of people or a community. A researcher who is interested in studying people of a community, their age and sex composition, caste-wise distribution, religious groups, level of education, occupational status and other aspects, designs his study as descriptive design. Some researchers may use this design to know the proportion of the people in a particular population to study the opinion on smoking in the public areas as crime introduced by the government of Andhra Pradesh, or who favor dowry or feel that students' election should not be encouraged in educational institutions. The major emphasis in descriptive studies is on the discovery of ideas and insights. As the name suggests, descriptive studies are concerned with describing the characteristics of a particular individual or of a group. In this design, the researcher must clearly define what he wants to measure and must find adequate methods for measuring the relation between these variables. The design must be rigid and not flexible and must focus on the various issues, such as they have to formulate the objectives of the study, which includes why the study is being taken up and what the study is about. Second, should design the suitable methods of data collection, that includes which tool has to be used for gathering the data. Third, selection of sample. It means how many people need to be consulted for gathering the information. Fourth, data collection, selecting the universe where the data need to be gathered and how much time is required to complete the study. Fifth, processing and analyzing the data. Sixth, documenting or reporting the findings. Generally, in descriptive research, the data can be collected in a single situation pertaining to single time period, that is called as one cell design, or single set situation pertaining to two periods, or comparison study between two situations in one single period or two situations in two different periods. Now, what is the purpose of descriptive research? Its purposes are to describe the characteristics of certain groups, such as, for example, sex, age, income and so on. Second, to determine the proportion of people who behave in a certain way. Third, to make specific prediction. Fourth, to determine the relationship between the various variables, and it is very common to use descriptive research to examine difference between groups or other relationship between variables. Now, we will try to understand what are the major steps followed in descriptive design. For ensuring dependability, we have to follow certain steps or specific steps in conducting a descriptive research. Now, let us understand each step carefully. First one, select and state a research problem. You can find innumerable research problems in the field of open and distance education. Obviously, we cannot study all the problems. It is hence extremely important to select a research area that can make meaningful contribution to the understanding of the state of the art in open and distance education in the concerned area for alleviating problematic situation and improve it further. Also, you must consider feasibility of conducting a research study given the time, resources and your own capabilities. For example, you would have read in the newspaper that for the census 2011, several million people are involved, several million terms of papers were consumed and so on. The cardinal principle is to choose a research problem that is not too small to be insignificant, but not too big to be impossible. The choice of research problem can be significantly facilitated by a careful examination of the situation occurring in the field through study of documents, consulting others familiar with the situation, consulting research studies carried out in the field earlier and relevant to the area of the problem you plan to study. That is, examine, review of research carried out by scholars and your own perceived concern. Remember, you must document your findings and understanding of the situation based on this exercise. This will help you to figure out availability of existing knowledge in the field, the contradiction as well as the gaps that exist in the knowledge in the concerned area of your interest. Usually, choice of a research problem is guided by either contradiction or gaps. Where there is no research, then it will be a bigger problem. Next step is to define and state a research problem. The statement should be self-explanatory, at the same time precise. For example, a statement like a study of socio-economic status of distance education students in India is both short and specific. It specifies the scope of the study, namely socio-economic status, distance education students as a sample and India as a geographical spread. Before you formulate your research problem, you will be better advised to examine statement of research problem from the journals and reports documenting research in distance education. Second major step is to state research objectives. Stating research objective is the first level of specification. Statement of research objective is the second but very important stage of specification. Under this, you state objectives with respect to each of the major variables, descriptive relationships and causal relationship to be covered by your study. Next major step is formulating a hypothesis. Please remember, research hypothesis facilitates conducting research by testing the hypothesis, but need not be a necessary component of all research problems. Formulation of hypothesis must be based on scientific assumption based on valid data and information. Next major step is we define the variables in descriptive research. As much as any scientific research in social and behavioral sciences, defining variables occupies a very important space. There are two issues here. First is the choice of variables that you want to include in your study. Let us ask back our example of study of socio-economic status of distant education students in India. There can be very large variables in socio-economic status. You need to choose only such variable that will contribute to better understanding of the situation with respect to the students in distant education. Second is defining the variables. Sometimes you may need to define in the context of the study, called operational definition. For example, Economic status may mean employment status, monthly earning of the learner, monthly earning of the family, per capita expenditure on the family, etc. Since you may not be able to accommodate all the different parameters of the variable economic status, you may have to create your own operational definition to describe the meaning of economic status specifically to your study. Another important step is to define a sample. Sample is a subset that should represent the population. In terms of feasibility, you may be able to collect data, say from 400 distance education students. These 400 students should be able to represent the few million students enrolled in open and distance education. To ensure that representativeness of the population, you need to resort to sampling techniques. In descriptive research, such representativeness is often established by resorting to some kind of randomization, especially stratified randomization. Selection or construction of research instruments are directly linked to the choice and definition of variables. Depending upon the nature of the variable, you may construct or select from an existing repertoire of questionnaires, standardized tests, inventories, data blanks, various types of scales and quasi-scales, etc. Although it is desirable that every research instrument is reliable and valid, it may not be possible in all cases. For example, the questionnaire or a data blank may not necessarily be standardized and possess tested psychometric properties, but it is important to subject such instruments to field trial so that you make sure that you can depend upon the data collected through such instruments. Another important step is to collect the data. There are several techniques of collecting data for descriptive research. Most common in the field of education is collecting data by personally administrating the tool constructed for the study. The other alternative is to mail questionnaire or online surveys. The response rate is in personally administrated mechanism of data collection is high. It also assures quality. Response rate in mailed questionnaire all over the world is very low, often below 10%. So, to get response from foreign distance education student, you must send research instruments to about 4,000 students. Besides, it is wasteful and expensive, difficult to ensure quality. Also, respondents and non-respondent students may upset your sampling design. Third is the online response for data collection. Online surveys are most economical as very large number of students can respond. Another important step after collecting of data is analyze the data and interpret the results. After data collection, data must be carefully screened, cleaned, classified, tabulated and then analysis to find the results. Depending upon the objectives and hypothesis, you may use descriptive statistics like central tendencies or go further to use correlational statistics to describe relationship between various variables. You must then make an effort to interpret results, explaining the reasons for the results that you found, explaining possible reasons of relationship between various variables, various events and phenomena. For example, if rural distance education students drop out more than their counterparts, you must put forward your assumption and argument why is it so. And the last step is to write a research report. Final stage in carrying out a descriptive survey is writing the research report. The research report must contain all the elements and stages mentioned. Argument is a necessary component of a research. You must argue at every stage. Why did you select the problem? How did you arrive at the statement objectives and hypothesis? Reason for choosing particular set of variables and creating operational definitions. Construction and choice of research instruments from an existing inventory of such instruments. Choice of sample and data collection. Choice of statistic for data analysis and interpretations and conclusions arrived at from the research study. Now, what are the various types of descriptive studies? There are a number of descriptive study designs options, including correlation studies of population as well as case study or report and cross-sectional surveys among individuals. Each of these descriptive study design provides information of various characteristics of person, place or time, and each has unique strengths and limitations. Now, let us get to know about these different descriptive study designs. We begin our understanding with correlation studies. Is already mentioned earlier, uses data from entire populations to compare disease frequency between different groups oblique segments during the same period of time or in the same population at different points of time. Correlational studies explore the statistical connection between disease in different population groups and estimated exposures in groups rather than individuals. For example, they may correlate anemia rates by country with estimates of low birth weight or low intake of iron rich foods or parasitic infestation such as hookworm infestation, etc. So, correlational studies are used to look for relationship between variables. The correlation coefficient denoted by R is a descriptive measure of association in correlation studies. This coefficient, that is, the value can vary between +1 and -1, which quantifies the extent to which there is a linear relationship between the exposure and disease. Interestingly, while correlational studies can suggest that there is a relationship between variables, finding a correlation does not prove that one variable causes a change in another variable. In other words, correlation does not equal causation. For example, a correlational study might suggest that there is a relationship between dietary components and coronary heart disease, but it cannot prove that a change in one variable causes a change in the second variable. Other factors might play a role, including lifestyle habits, stress, and a myriad of other variables. Correlational studies are therefore useful for the formulation of hypotheses. For example, correlation data can raise the hypothesis that consumption of N3 fatty acids can decrease the risk of coronary heart disease. Testing this hypothesis would require the design and conduct of analytic studies among individuals, which would account for the effect of other risk factors. We will learn more about analytical studies in the coming chapters. Here, continuing our discussion regarding the strengths of correlation studies, the chief strength of correlational studies is that they constitute the final step in investigating a possible exposure disease relationship, which contributes to this frequent use in epidemiological research. Further, they can be done quickly and inexpensively, often using the already available data. The main limitations of correlation studies is the inability to link exposure with disease in particular individual. Since correlational studies refer to whole population rather than individuals, it is not possible to link an exposure to occurrence of disease in the same person. A second major limitation of correlation study is the lack of ability to control for the effect of potential confounding factors. Finally, correlational data represents average exposure consumption levels rather than actual individual levels one's values. Another important type is the case study or the report. Case study or the report is a form of qualitative descriptive research that is used to look at individuals or a small group of participants or a group as a whole. It refers to the collection and presentation of detailed information about a particular participant, event, institution or a small group, frequently including the accounts of subjects themselves. While using case study, researchers do not focus on the discovery of a universal generalized truth, nor do they typically look for cause-effect relationships. Instead, emphasis is placed on exploration, observation and description. We are already aware that in research, the scientist studies variables. The case study typically examines the interplay of all variables in order to provide as complete an understanding of an event or situation as possible. So, this type of comprehensive understanding is arrived at through a process which involves an in-depth description of the entity, that is, the person, situation, event that have been studied and evaluated, and the circumstances under which it is used, the characteristics of people, processes involved in it, and the nature of the community area in which it is located. By using case studies, we therefore seek a holistic understanding of the event or situation in question using inductive logic reason from specific to more general terms. Case studies are often referred to interchangeably with ethnography, field study and participant observation. Unlike more statistically based studies which search for quantifiable data, the goal of a case study is to offer new variables and questions for further research. Statistical based studies, which are quantitative, are concerned with the distribution of a particular trait or a small number of traits in a population, whereas the case study, which is qualitative, is concerned with the whole variety of traits variables to be found in a particular instance situation. There are different types of data collection in case studies. These may include documents, medical records, interviews, direct observation and participant observation, and artifacts. Individual case studies reports can be expanded case series, which describe characteristics of a number of individuals, patients, instances, etc. Case series can be therefore referred to as a collection of individual case report studies which may occur within a fairly short period of time. So, this design has historical importance as it was often used as an early means to identify the beginning or presence of an epidemic. This is best illustrated by the recognition and formulation of hypotheses concerning possible risk factors of acquired immunodeficiency syndrome by early epidemiologists based on 5 cases of pneumonia reported among young, previously healthy homosexual men in the US in the early 1980s. As a result of this case series, the Center for Disease Control immediately initiated a surveillance program to quantify the magnitude of this problem, that is AIDS, and develop the diagnostic criteria what appeared to be a new disease. The biggest strength of using case study is case series in epidemiological research is that it deals with creativity, innovation and context. It is useful in the recognition of new disease and the formulation of hypotheses concerning the possible risk factors linked to the disease. While case studies and case series are very useful for hypothesis formulation, they cannot be used to test for the presence of a valid statistical association. The fundamental limitation of case study is that they are difficult to generalize because of inherent subjectivity and because they are based on qualitative subjective data generalizable only to a particular context. Although case series can be sufficiently large to permit quantification, the interpretability of such information is severely limited by the lack of an appropriate comparison group. So, from case studies, we move on to the third type of descriptive study used in epidemiological research, that is cross-sectional study survey. And we would like to begin our study of cross-sectional survey by informing our learners that cross-sectional studies can be either descriptive or analytical. Here, we will focus on the descriptive cross-sectional studies. Most of the descriptive studies you would realize are cross-sectional in nature and are generally called surveys. What do you mean by the term cross-sectional survey? Cross-sectional survey is a type of descriptive epidemiological study design in individuals that involve observation of some subset of a population of items all at the same time. Cross-sectional studies can therefore be thought of as providing the snapshot of the frequency and characteristic of a disease on a population at a particular time. In other words, snapshot of the health status of a population at a specified time. is that descriptive cross-sectional surveys therefore, as you may have realized by now, are in general useful for assessing disease status at a point in time. They simply categorizes the prevalence of disease in a specified population. Prevalence can be assessed at either a point in time, that is point prevalence, or over a defined period of time, that is the period prevalence. We learn about point and period prevalence later. The basic strength of cross-sectional studies lies in the fact that they can study an entire population or a representative sample. They provide an estimate of prevalence of all factors measured and have greater generalizability. Note here that descriptive cross-sectional studies are generally used for planning or administrating preventive or health care services, surveillance programs, and surveys and polls. Further, it is important to note that cross-sectional studies are useful only at finding some kind of association rather than for testing the hypothesis. This aspect, that is the biostatics, as you may have realized by now, is true for all descriptive studies. Analytic cross-sectional studies, in contrast, compare the proportion of exposed person who are diseased with the proportion of non-exposed person who are diseased. One examples of cross-sectional surveys in India is the AIDS Prevention Control Project, which has been implemented intensive HIV/AIDS prevention activities in Indian state of Tamil Nadu since 1995. The project launched the first wave of behavior surveillance survey in 1996 and followed up with successive surveys in 97, 98 and 99 to observe trends in high risk behavior among selected population groups. In Tamil Nadu, these subpopulations included persons at high risk such as female sex workers, bridge groups such as truck drivers and their helpers, who have a significant sexual contact with both high and low risk groups and moderate to low risk groups with varying socio-demographic characteristics such as factory workers and students. The Indian National Family and Health Survey is yet another widely known example of cross-sectional demographic and health surveys that have been carried out in several developing countries with the primary purpose of collecting information on health, fertility and other family issues from ever married women of fertility age. The first phase of NFHS-1 was completed between April 92 and August 93 with a sample of ever married women of age between 13 and 49. The second wave of NFHS-T1 was completed between November 98 and December 99, sampling of ever married women of age 15 to 49. Each survey contained reports from approximately 90,000 women sampled from all Indian states using a stratified and clustered survey design. The largest component of the survey is an individual questionnaire administered to each ever married woman of fertility age in the sample. The questionnaire also includes information on health, contraception and fertility preferences, as well as a complete birth history and very detailed information on the health status of younger children. Such data are of great value to public nutritionists and policy makers and administrators in assessing the health status and healthcare needs of the Indian population. With a review of the cross-sectional surveys, we end our study of descriptive epidemiological studies. I hope you would have got a good insight into descriptive studies, their strengths and limitations. A brief summary. Descriptive studies was the main focus of study of this lesson, and descriptive studies, as the name implies, deals with describing the general characteristics of disease distribution, particularly in relation to person, place or time. Descriptive studies are important as it tries to draw inferences about the cause and effect. These studies play an important role in providing information from another perspective when it is not possible for us to identify variables which explain the causes. Descriptive research has gained acceptance as a valid form of research in education, and in recent years the number of descriptive studies published in research journals and conferences proceedings has increased. They are valuable to epidemiologists in describing the disease pattern, that is, reveal patterns associated with a specific disease without an emphasis on pre-specified hypothesis. Hence, this type of studies are sometimes referred to as hypothesis generating studies. The important uses of descriptive studies include trend analysis, health nutrition care planning, and hypothesis generation and or formulating research questions. We have also learned that most of the descriptive studies are cross-sectional in nature and are generally called surveys. Descriptive cross-sectional analysis surveys, therefore, as you may have realized by now, are in general useful for assessing disease status at a point in time. They simply categorize the prevalence of disease in a specified population.